Have you ever looked at a statistic and just thought, what's the real story here? Well, today we're going beyond the numbers. We're going to explore the human side of data and dive into the art of asking one simple but absolutely crucial question. Why?
Okay, let's start with just a number, 45%. In 2010, this was the contraceptive use rate in Rwanda, according to a major public health study.
Now, on its own, that number is actually kind of amazing. I mean, it's a huge jump from just 4% a decade earlier. So that's great progress, but it also shows a pretty big gap. The country was still way short of its national goal of 70%.
And this is exactly where the numbers go silent. See, the data is great at telling us what is happening, but it can't tell us why. Why was there still a gap, even with all this progress? To get that answer, you have to look way beyond the spreadsheet. So finding that why takes a totally different approach. It means researchers have to pull out a different set of tools, ones that are designed not for counting, but for understanding. And that's what we call qualitative research. It's not about how many, it's about the story. You could say it opens up these little windows into how culture and life experience shape health, letting us really get a feel for the lived experiences behind the stats. I love this way of thinking about it. Quantitative research, the numbers, gives you the skeleton. It tells you the size and shape of the issue. But qualitative research, that provides the flesh and blood. It asks why and how, and it brings the whole story to life. So how do researchers actually do this? How do they capture something as complex as a human story or experience? Well, they've got a whole toolkit of methods. Things like in-depth interviews, focus groups, you've probably heard of those. But one of the most creative and honestly empowering methods is something called photo voice. The idea behind photo voice is just so powerful in its simplicity. Instead of having researchers on the outside looking in, they literally hand over the camera. People inside a community get to document their own lives, which transforms them from being subjects of a study into active storytellers. The whole process is pretty straightforward, but the results can be huge. First, people capture their world in pictures. Then, they come together and narrate the stories behind those photos. And finally, and this is the game-changing part, they use these visual stories to advocate for real change with the people in power. To really see how big of an impact this can have, let's head over to a public housing community in Durban, South Africa. Okay, so here's the situation. City officials, probably looking at their maps and zoning documents, decided that a local community soccer field was the perfect spot to build a new parking lot. Their data told them they needed more parking spaces. Simple, right? Well, what their data didn't show was what that field actually meant to the community. So researchers gave cameras to the local kids. And the photos they took told a completely different story. It was a vivid, powerful story about a place that was the absolute heart of their neighborhood, a place crucial for their health, for their friendships, for everything. So the kids presented their photos to the city officials. And those images? They were just undeniable proof of what all the official reports had missed. And the result? The city canceled the plan. The field was saved. Not by a spreadsheet, but by a story told through a camera lens. This is so cool, because this method doesn't just point out what's wrong. It can actually help us find the right solutions. When we understand the human story, we can build programs that actually work. A project in Malawi is a perfect example of this. So the problem was that family planning use was really low, and most programs were only talking to women. This project decided to try something different and engage men. The quantitative data came back and it was crystal clear. The program was a huge success. The numbers proved that it worked. But it was the qualitative interviews, the stories, that revealed why it worked. The secret sauce wasn't just giving men information. It was that the program had actually improved communication between partners. That was the key. And think about that for a second. Without that insight, they could have scaled up the whole program, focusing on the wrong things. Which really brings us to the big picture here, why this all matters so much. Look, qualitative research isn't just a nice to have, it is absolutely essential. It gives us the context that makes numbers make sense. It gives a voice to communities, like those kids in Durban. It helps us uncover the real root causes of problems. And maybe most importantly, it gives us the why. We need to build solutions that actually work for real people in their real lives. Because, at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Every single data point, every percentage, it all represents a person with a story, a family facing a challenge, a community hoping for something better.
So it really leaves us with a critical question, one that anyone trying to make a difference should ask themselves. What important stories are we missing when we only look at the data?